In this world, there is one interesting continent called Gaia. Several years ago, monsters from this continent began to disappear. At first, everyone thought that this was just happening, but it turned out to be a mistake. All the disappeared monsters moved to another dimension. Traveling between worlds was a dream of many wizards. It is unclear why monsters were the ones to experience this, but they helped wizards in their research, so it is not so important. One of the wizards took up this issue closely, adjusted all the coordinates and established an ideal mechanical connection in the created portal. Finally creating a magic circle, he raised his hands to the ceiling, because it was a great stroke of luck that he was able to use the dungeon called the Great Labyrinth. If you use the magical power of this place, then crossing the dimension will not be difficult, so the wizard did it. A crazy, almost uncontrollable energy formed around the circle. She lifted the man into the air, enveloping him from all sides, after which there was a bright flash of light, which meant that the device had worked. And then a huge beam, like a comet, fell from the sky of another dimension. Upon landing, the man felt a different flow of air and a change in temperature with his eyes closed, and that could mean one thing. He succeeded and teleported. He stood up happily and raised his hands up, but then looked around him. He realized that something was wrong and there was no portal back. Looking around and not seeing anything but a pile of sand and craters, the man became worried. Then it began to dawn on him what had happened. The wizard's suggestion angered him, as the dungeon had just moved dimensions. The entire portal ended up in a dimension that could have been anywhere, and as a result, he found himself in the ordinary world of people, being carefully examined by the guy next to him. A portal appeared in his room and he looked at it in fascination, not understanding what to do next. The next day arrived in the human world. People had already stood up and filled the space of the room, which looked like a university. There were girls standing at the entrance and discussing their favorite popular student, Jun. A D-rank hunter named Kang Jin-hyuk was watching them with a little disdain. He thought that concentrating on one thing was an unaffordable luxury for him. Suddenly, Jin-hyuk's friend ran up to him, who, like the guy himself, was carrying a huge bottle of water. They loaded everything into the truck and got in themselves. Leaning back tiredly, Jin-hyuk sighed heavily, and his friend praised him for his work and suggested that he take a break. Then he asked if Jin-hyuk was cold in this weather, but the guy replied that he was a hunter, and they tolerate heat and cold very well. Looking at Jin-hyuk in surprise, the man asked if this was about D-rank. The guy replied that, fortunately, yes, and thanks to this, his heating bill became lower. The man smiled and said that it was cool and he was even a little jealous. But why does a hunter work part-time in such a place as a loader? The guy answered that he simply does not have money. The man said that it was all because of the guild that did not loosen its monopoly. Jin-hyuk replied that these guys were really obnoxious and the situation had gotten even worse lately. The man asked what had happened between the guilds, and the guy replied that a psychopath had appeared who wanted to destroy all the influential hunters, but he had never been caught. The man replied that the more he knew about the guys from the main guild, the crazier they seemed. Jin-hyuk agreed with this statement. But suddenly a strange sound, similar to a scream, was heard, but the concert had not yet begun. Jin-hyuk immediately jumped out of the car under the man's surprised gaze. The guy knew that it was a cry for help, caused by the appearance of people with weapons or the appearance of monsters, one of the two. Having reached the building, the guy saw people running out of it in horror, and a whole crowd of monsters ran after them, wanting to attack. Stretching his arms and looking at the monsters, the boy knew this was his chance. He then summoned his inventory, which appeared in the air as a light panel. Jin-hyuk clicked on the only item in his collection, the bat. The next moment, she began to materialize in his arms. Having received his bat, the guy was delighted and prepared to attack. But suddenly his friend from the truck appeared next to him and, warming up, said that he had trained a lot so he could help. But Jin-hyuk replied that there was a special wavelength around the monster. Therefore, he is invulnerable to attacks from ordinary people and weapons. The only ones who can challenge the wave are hunters who have been given the appropriate characteristics, so it is better for a man not to do anything stupid and stay away. Scratching his head, the man replied that he understood everything and told Jin-hyuk to be careful. Then the guy, heading against the flow of fleeing people, firmly decided for himself. Before the guys from the big guild came, he himself had to finish the hunt, so he rushed forward. Even if you catch the smallest ones, you won't have to worry about money for the whole year. But then another hunter appeared next to Jin-hyuk, ordering the newcomer not to interfere. He slammed on the brakes and then grabbed Jin-hyuk by his shirt. Then, swinging, he threw the guy back while the rest of the hunters approached the monsters. The guy fell onto the road and slid along the asphalt for a couple of meters. He thought with annoyance that these hunters had arrived too quickly. It was the guild in charge of this zone, called Titan. The vice leader of the guild, An Do-yoon, ordered the guy not to even think about it and to leave. Jin-hyuk indignantly replied that then all the cream would go to them as usual, even though he was the first to arrive. Do-yoon chuckled and said that it didn't mean anything because it was their area. The guy asked where it was written, but the man replied that it wasn't legally confirmed, but it worked the other way around. Who told Jin Hyuk that this was his zone? It wasn't because the guy just got here first. The logic of the conversation seemed crazy. Then Jin Hyuk, not wanting to delay, rushed forward. He attacked the guild's deputy, saying that they needed to be more modest. And then he swung his bat straight at Do Yoon. But the next moment he already managed to regret it. Do Yoon blocked the guy's attack with one movement of his hand and hit him in the face with his palm. But this small blow was enough to make Jin Hyuk fall to the ground. An angry Do Yoon asked how dare a piece of trash like Jin Hyuk cross his path. Next time, he won't stand on ceremony and will simply destroy him. Rubbing his bruised cheek, Jin Hyuk understood that this guy was superior to him in strength, speed, and everything else. Out of resentment, he squeezed his bat with all his might. He thought, is there really a difference between a D-rank hunter and a hunter from a big guild? It's really offensive and makes you want to be much stronger. The guy was angry at the tyranny of the big guilds, but all he could do was find another part-time job. The guy was powerless against these guilds, so after his part-time job, he had a lot of thoughts. He felt like he wanted this psychopath who hadn't been caught yet to wipe out everyone from the Titan Guild. But the boy was most struck by something else. He returned home and thought about it. As he stepped into the room, he knew that it was all because of his own weakness. Because of her, he feels deeply defeated as he sits on the couch. Throwing his head back, Jin Hyuk tried to relax and almost fell asleep after a hard day. But then he touched his cheek and thought with annoyance that it was still numb. Suddenly, Jin Hyuk heard a strange sound and turned around to see what was going on. And at that very moment, his life was about to change because he saw something strange. In front of him, shining and splashing out a bunch of energy, the gates opened, inside of which was darkness. The guy looked at them in surprise, trying to understand what it was. Looking into the darkness, Jin Hyuk realized that there seemed to be someone there. Then, right in front of the guy's nose, the face of a terrible monster appeared. Jin Hyuk screamed and jumped away from the strange portal. He saw real goblins, so he had to get his weapon out quickly. But then he turned around and began to realize what was happening. Can't these monsters just see him, unlike the guy himself? Then Jin Hyuk extended his hand towards the unusual spatial hole. His hand passed through the haze and ended up in a different place. The boy raised his head, trying to understand what he was feeling. And then he stuck his hand out of the portal. The limb was completely intact. Jin Hyuk looked at his hand and realized that he had not experienced any resistance or side effects. Looking happily at the portal, the guy realized that, most likely, a dungeon had appeared in his attic. After some time, the guy decided to open a can of soda. Then he brought it to his mouth and took a sip, after which he abruptly put the jar on the table. And then he sat down and thought about what had happened. And if his guess is correct, this is clearly a dungeon that previously existed as a concept. Leaning back on the sofa, Jin Hyuk thought that the main problem was that it was in his room. Should he report this to the association or just ignore it? The possibility of the dungeon's existence has always been just an unproven theory, so the guy will be kicked out of his own house if he reports it. Jin Hyuk took another sip of his soda while thinking. And then he decided that he would rather keep it for himself than give it to a stupid association. Although it could be dangerous if monsters were able to enter this world. So we need to check first. Standing in front of the portal, the guy understood that with his abilities he would only be able to catch 2 or 3 goblins. But if more monsters come here, he might lose his life. But this realization did not stop the guy, and he decided to penetrate the dungeon. After passing through the portal, Jin Hyuk found himself on the first floor of the goblin labyrinth, which the guy himself could not believe. Suddenly, strange sounds were heard behind him. A goblin with a metal stick in his hands was rushing towards him like a madman, but he didn't have time to hit the guy as he bounced back to the portal. And then the device seemed to suck him back in, to the monster's surprise. When Jin Hyuk arrived on the other side, he saw a goblin looking around in confusion. The goblin began waving his stick in all directions, trying to find the guy who had become invisible. But he looked at the monster with a grin and realized that no one else would come here. Then he jumped up and headed towards the gate again. He had no reason to fear one goblin. Then he seemed to jump out of nowhere again and swung the bat at the monster. Then he dealt him a heavy blow. The monster flew away from the guy several meters. Later, he tried to get up, but the guy was already flying straight towards him. Jin Hyuk raised his weapon above him and struck the monster with it, after which the goblin no longer had a chance to win. His eyes froze, looking at Jin Hyuk in horror. But the guy said not to look at him like that because he was also in despair, after which he dealt the final crushing blow to the goblin. After becoming a hunter, Jin Hyuk fought a monster himself for the first time today, and now the level that had not changed for 3 years has increased. But in any case, he only caught 1 goblin. The boy once again realized how great the tyranny of control of the large guilds over the hunters was, because they literally sold their conscience. If you think about it, the bodies of these monsters can be sold for decent money. A goblin's body is worth at least 3 million won. The guy was very interested in how much he would get for this goblin. The next day arrived and the sun was already at its zenith. It illuminated one of the many offices. The elevator rose to the high 42nd floor. Coming out of it, one could see many workers sitting at tables and receiving customers. Jin Hyuk approached one of them and said that he wanted to sell the goblin's body. He then opened his inventory and clicked on the goblin icon. After that, the monster materialized right in front of the guy. The worker, putting on gloves, decided to examine the monster. He looked at it for a long time and then noticed a large hole in its head. Then the worker guessed that Jin Hyuk had a low hunter level. The guy asked how he knew that. Picking up the broken goblin like a toy, the man replied that if you catch it like that, the value of the product is lost, and next time you need to aim for more vital points. Therefore, the worker can only pay 3.2 million won for this body. But Jin Hyuk agreed to this price. Then the man asked where the guy caught this monster. Only after the answer could he receive payment. The guy asked, "Is it really that important?" The worker replied that this was established by law, so nothing could be done about it. The Titan Guild zone last time. The man asked the boy why he was so worried. He wouldn't get another dream anyway. But then a scream and curses were heard, which Jin Hyuk noticed. People from the Black Dragon Guild arrived, who, apparently, were not liked for their cruelty. One of the guys pointed to one of the workers and said it was him. The worker sitting opposite Jin Hyuk said that they had found him after all. But the guy didn't understand what was going on and asked the man to explain. But the guys from the guild had already approached Jin Hyuk and said that it was all his fault. The guy didn't understand what he had done. Then the man grabbed Jin Hyuk by the shirt and said that he had intercepted their monster. But the worker serving Jin Hyuk said that he was not the person they were looking for. The guild members were surprised and asked who had disturbed them then, and the worker pointed to the blonde man sitting not far from them. Then the guild members approached the young man, and immediately a fist hit him in the face. The blow almost made the guy fall off the bench he was sitting on. His friend immediately shouted, "What are they doing?" Then one of the guys replied that this man was hunting on their guild's territory without permission, and if his friend didn't want to compensate for it, then he shouldn't even try. Suddenly someone shouted at the guys to stop. It was their leader who sat down next to the beaten guy, and then he asked him why he was wandering around their territory. Did he really want to lose his life? The guy, who no longer understood anything, carefully raised his head. Then the leader of the guild company grabbed the guy by the hair and said that he could become a victim of a psychopath who destroys hunters. But the guy didn't respond with anything other than negative words about the guild, for which he received even more punishment. Then the guild guys picked up the beaten guy and took him with them to take him away. The worker said that they should just take the money and leave quietly, since they were making ridiculous accusations. Then, turning to Jin Hyuk, he said that if he didn't want to end up like that, then he'd better not go near the place occupied by the guild. The guy asked the worker how he knew so much about this guild, and he answered that all guilds of a certain scale are connected to this server. Then Jin Hyuk asked, did that man really know everything and that's why he confessed so easily? But the worker replied that if they were caught lying about the location, the liar would have his hunting license confiscated for life and be sent to prison, so it was better not to joke about it. Jin Hyuk thought he was about to get into trouble because he almost lied. Then he apologized for disturbing him and put the goblin back. Thus, his body seemed to evaporate and was placed back into the inventory. The worker asked if the guy was just going to leave without selling anything, but he replied that he was, because he had changed his mind. He could also have been dragged away with a beating, so you need to try not to be noticed by such guys. But we'll see who has the last laugh, as Jin Hyuk is determined to get stronger in this dungeon. It was a dark night, and the boy decided to enter the dungeon to become stronger. And of course, you need to prepare for this. Jin Hyuk thought he had taken care of everything, and decided to take with him 2 stones of 1 and 5 centimeters called Hearthstone, worth 1 million won, which has the ability to return to the right time regardless of place and time. To use it, you need to leave this stone where you need to return, and take the small stone with you, thanks to which you can return to the big one. And although it costs a lot, it is necessary now. But the guy seemed to be fooled by the advertising campaign, which said that he could find out the location of monsters at any time, anywhere. The search radar was purchased for 400,000 won, but in reality it is junk that can only detect at a distance of 50 meters in all directions. However, for a guy going into a dungeon alone, it's like an extra life. It seems to work. You can make 1 catch in 1 hour and most likely it will be a goblin. Confidently closing the radar, which looked like a compass, the guy confidently looked at the entrance to the dungeon, deciding that it was time to level up. Once he reached the spot, Jin Hyuk used his bat to attack. At first, it was just 1 goblin. After it was destroyed, Jin Hyuk's level went up from 4 to 5. After the second goblin, from level 5 to 6. The third and fourth goblins raised the guy to level 9. All the monsters in the labyrinth were goblins, and although everything was quite monotonous, for a low-ranking newbie, this was the optimal place to work. Washing down the dryness in his throat with water, the boy stared at the goblins lying around him. Opening the stats window, Jin Hyuk realized that although his level had increased, his abilities were still poor. But still, the dungeon does not disappear. And from this moment on, the guy can gradually improve his skills, so he needs to continue hunting. After that, he opened his inventory and added more goblins to it. After that, there was only 1 free seat left. This made Jin Hyuk upset, and if there was one last spot left, it would be better to fill it with a big monster. Namely, what is more expensive, so it is worth looking at the radar. And suddenly Jin Hyuk saw someone approaching him. At 9 o'clock, someone was walking straight towards the guy. Jin Hyuk thought that if he waited here and then made a surprise attack, it would be quite easy. The guy chose a good position 5 meters ahead and hid, striking a pose. The distance kept decreasing and there were only 3 meters left between the guy and the victim. Then a helmet with horns appeared from around the corner. The guy jumped out of hiding and struck straight at him. The helmet, unable to withstand the attack, flew off to the side. Jin Hyuk became alert, listening to the strange sounds. And then, looking at his enemy, he saw a small man holding his head. It was definitely not a goblin but looked more like a human. Then Jin Hyuk asked if he was okay. The little man, like a gnome, raised his head and began to curse in an incomprehensible language. The boy thought that he might be a foreigner, but the language sounded too strange to be the language of any country. Realizing that the dwarf looked angry, Jin Hyuk decided to apologize to the stranger. And then he said he had no idea there were other people here. The man stared at the boy in surprise. Suddenly he reached into his carry-on bag and began rummaging around in it. And then he took out some object and threw it into the guy's hands. Jin Hyuk caught something that looked like beads or a bracelet and asked what it was. Perhaps it was a necklace, and then the boy asked the dwarf why he needed it. There was a small black bead hanging at the end of the necklace, and Jin Hyuk decided to wear the ornament around his neck. As soon as he did this, the bead began to glow. And then the guy immediately understood the dwarf's curse words, for whom the chain served as a translator. The guy said that he understood perfectly well why the dwarf was angry, but the situation was very controversial. The strange interlocutor did not want to listen and constantly interrupted the guy with his curses. Then Jin Hyuk bowed again and apologized. But the dwarf sent him away and said that this was the first time he had met such a guy in all his 132 years of life. And only then did Jin Hyuk realize that there was a real dwarf in front of him. The gnomes are a race of blacksmiths and look just like the guy imagined, and then he started picking up the things the gnome dropped. One of them was quite curious, a very beautiful sword. Taking it in his hand, the guy realized that it was a very rare item. Seeing the guy with his sword, the dwarf pounced on him and ordered him to give him his things. Jin Hyuk understood that even if it was just a dwarf, having such things meant that he was definitely very strong, so it was better for him to return everything and go his own way. The dwarf also took out a bag and ordered the guy to put all the things in it. The guy agreed, and while he was putting everything away, the gnome noticed his bat lying nearby. At this time, Jin Hyuk put everything in a bag and decided to return it to its owner. But, raising his head, he asked in surprise what the gnome was doing with his bat. And the dwarf at this time stared at this weapon with great interest. And then he persistently asked the guy where he got it. Jin Hyuk was so surprised that he didn't immediately understand what the dwarf was talking about and decided to ask him again. The dwarf pointed to the bat again and said that it was oliharkon, a legendary metal that, according to Plato, was used on the continent of Atlantis. It is a very common metal on Earth and the material of Jin Hyuk's only hunting weapon. That's all the guy knows about aluminum, but for some reason the dwarf can't buy it even for hundreds of millions of dollars, because for them, this material is legendary. After that, the dwarf invited the guy to his workshop to see how to handle the bat. The guy initially refused, but the dwarf said he would exchange it for rare items. So the guy followed the dwarf, however. If you forget about these rare items for a second, something is strange. Why did this gnome set up a workshop in such a place and live alone? The gnome locked himself in the room, after which a long time passed, and the guy asked what he was doing there. It was just aluminum, but perhaps the dwarf chooses his weapon in advance. These thoughts worried the guy and made him anxious. But then the dwarf's voice was heard, saying that he was finished. He then walked out holding a red bat and told Jin Hyuk to ignore it and just take it. He reached out and tossed the gun to the guy. Then he said his bat was nothing compared to this. The guy caught the weapon in one hand and began to examine it. Then he asked if it was really his bat, since its color had turned red. But the dwarf replied to the foolish fellow that this was the peculiarity of oriharkon. Although it was a soft and light metal in its use, the more you enchanted it, the redder and stronger it became. Looking at his new weapon, the word enchant interested the boy most. Was his bat magical now? Returning home, the guy decided to try out his new weapon. Such enchanted items can only be obtained from A rank and higher monsters. Therefore, what the guy is holding in his hands now is a very rare item. This bat was not like his previous bat. How could something like this be created artificially? And who is this gnome? But it doesn't matter, because the dungeon finally brought luck to his life. The system indicated that this was a legendary baseball bat of legendary rank. New effect: S durability, presence detection, and automatic search. Jin Hyuk thought that this bat was quite expensive, but it belonged to the guy, so he couldn't sell it. He remembered that standing next to the gnome, the guy was looking at the bat and asking again if this bat was really his. The dwarf laughed and said that it was true, because it was gratitude for the experience that the guy gave him, and now no one except Jin Hyuk would be able to use it. And in the end, you won't make any money selling this bat. Taking the bat out of his inventory, the guy looked at it again. And then, having returned her back, he decided to look for other ways to make money. Going into one of the tabs, Jin Hek saw a goblin in his inventory. And then he realized that he needed to sell them first. The problem is how to do it. It won't work to sell to the association because of the location. But there are other options, like the black market hunting industry. They get rid of bodies without asking where they came from. Their contact information is very easy to get. They always hand out business cards to low-ranking hunters who need money. That's where Jin Hyuk headed, following the directions on the business card, which looked very suspicious. Then Kang Jin Hyuk was called by a man, Cho's assistant, Hyun Il, standing at the top. The man told the boy to come up to him, as the master was waiting for them. Walking to the place where the two men were standing, Jin Hyuk was glad that he found this place, since no one would come here. Organ trader Lee Chun-chol, disguised as a credit business that now sells and purchases monsters, asked if he could examine the goblin's body. Jin Hyuk opened his inventory without even saying hello, and then I clicked on the picture of the goblin. The men looked in surprise at what appeared before them. Chun-chol looked and couldn't believe his eyes, as the guy was clearly a newbie, but he had too many goblins in good condition, according to the assistant. Their condition was much better than Chun thought. Chol. That's why he said that the product is confirmed. Jin Hyuk warned just in case that there were 20 heads here. Chun-chol asked what price the guy wanted to set, and he replied that he wanted 5 million for each head. Then Chun-chol said that since the heads were badly damaged, 3 million for each would probably be enough. But the leader's assistant suddenly objected and said that it didn't matter what kind of head it was, because the clothes of these goblins were so shredded that they couldn't be used as decoration. And while the assistant looked at the goblins with admiration, Chun-chol thought with annoyance, why did he take this fool with him? Pretending not to notice the state of the bodies, Chun-chol apologized and said he was offering 3.5 million for each. Dissatisfied, Jin Hyuk said that he was demanding 4.5 million won and would not sell it for less. Chun-chol thought about it, and the guy replied that if he didn't like it, he would sell it somewhere else. But suddenly loud footsteps were heard and a voice calling the master. Men were running towards them, shouting that there was a problem and there was a monster there, so they had to run. Chun-chul, with fear in his eyes, didn't want to believe that a monster had come here, and Jin Hyuk just looked around with interest. The guy had heard that monster bodies could attract other monsters, but this was at a crazy bad time. The boy turned to Hen's assistant Il-yu asked if a real monster had come to them. Hen Il confirmed and said that 2 orcs were approaching them from nowhere. Jin Hyuk was worried because he was not at the level to do anything right now, so he needed to get out of here now. First, you need to take all the goblin bodies back into your inventory. But having done this, the guy realized that it was already too late to wish for this. Right in front of Jin Hek, a huge orc appeared with a scream. He looked creepy and dangerous, as befits a real orc. Chun-chol shouted at Jin Hyuk, saying that he was a hunter and had to do something, but the boy wanted to say that he was too weak, but he didn't have time. A moment later, a huge monster was rushing straight towards him, and then the orc swung his weapon at the guy, but he didn't have time to react. Watching the tip of the axe approaching him, Jin Hyuk had already decided that this would be his end in vain. But suddenly the inventory opened on its own, and a bat flew out of it. She managed to protect her master by holding back the orc's attack. After hitting the bat, a shockwave went off, throwing the monster back, but he remained standing. Not expecting such an attack, the orc looked closely at the bat flying by itself in front of Jin Hek. Chun-chul, who was standing behind the guy, asked Hyun Ilya, what did he just see? But the assistant replied that he didn't understand anything either. Jin Hyuk himself looked at the bat in surprise and thought that it looked strange that it had arbitrarily blocked the attack. Could this be a presence detection effect? Then maybe we should try fighting? But the orc didn't wait for the guy's decision and attacked him again. Taking the bat in his hands, the guy enthusiastically gripped the weapon and went on the attack. The orc swung, but missed the guy as he dodged and hit the monster in the leg. The leg hurt, which means the damage was done. After that, Jin Hyuk hit the monster again right on the head. He staggered, and the guy thought he could catch him. But he didn't have to do anything else because the orc just fell over, which meant the new bat was really that much cooler. And this also meant that Jin Hek had managed to catch the orc. His level immediately jumped from 24 to 36. The guy was happy that he passed 10 levels at once. Chun turned to Kang Jin. Hyuk Chol showed him with his finger that there was another orc behind him. It was unexpected and sudden, but the guy managed to dodge. He thought that the orc was a real weakling and a coward, since he attacked him from behind. This means that there is no honor in him, and he will get what he deserves. Jin Hek easily dealt with the monster, and he only needed one blow to send the orc to his friend. With the same powerful blow as last time, the guy hit the monster. One blow was enough for the orc to freeze and begin to stagger. And then, under the pull of the bat lying above his head, he fell down. Thus, the guy killed 2 orcs at once. His level automatically increased from 36 to 48. The guy couldn't believe that his weapon was so strong. The assistant asked Mr. Chol what they should do now. He replied that he should just keep quiet. And Jin Hek, raising his head proudly, asked, considering these 2 orcs, could they start negotiations again? After the deal, the guy went home. The monsters were bought from him at 15% above the market price. Looking at his big balance, Jin Hyuk couldn't believe it was real. Falling onto the bed, the guy realized that now everything was decided for him. All he can do is hunt and stop looking for new jobs. That day, a black market merchant named Lee Chun-chul, whom the boy saved from the Orcs, decided to continue doing business with him. He is not as simple as he seems, but Jin Hyuk thought that now he can catch Orcs himself. But if he wants to hunt higher-level monsters, it's impossible with the current weapons. But then a thought struck the guy, so he instantly got out of bed. One idea he had was to get items for free. Having collected a whole box of aluminum beer cans, the guy went underground. He brought all this to the surprised gnome, who happily looked at the jars of Oli Harkon and did not believe that it was all for him. Jin Hyuk also warned that there was a delicious drink inside them. The Oli Harkon container could be made for, was it really holy water? But the guy replied that it wasn't so and suggested that the gnome try it. After taking a sip, the dwarf immediately spat out what was left in his mouth in disgust. The gnome cursed and said that it looked more like crap than beer. Jin Hyuk thought that this drink was a bit bland, so he should give the dwarf something stronger. The guy handed the disgruntled gnome some soju and said that it tasted a little different. The annoyed dwarf agreed to take one sip. A smile spread across his face, and he said that it already tasted much better. The taste itself, of course, disappointed him a little, but the strength was good, so he decided to ask for a little more. And then he said that the guy should go and dig up some stuff. Surprised, Jin Hyuk thought it was a strange request, but he agreed. This noble metal was mithril, similar to silver, but harder and had more useful properties. As he walked down the stairs, Jin Hyuk thought about where he could find mithril. But what won't you do to get a weapon for free? The guy knew that mithril was a metal, but what did that have to do with soju? The guy decided not to think about it and just find the metal. He wandered not far into the thicket of the forest. Although it was a labyrinth, it looked like a real forest, with green trees and bushes. This was the second floor of the Dog and Skull Labyrinth. The system suggested that the hunter record the location at the warp point, but the guy didn't know what that meant. But in the end, he decided to agree, and the second floor signed in at the warp point, after which another gate opened in front of the guy. Now, Jin Hyuk, like in a game, could move from one floor to another using this gate. In any case, the guy made the right choice, as he will be able to take advantage of it on the way back. Passing by the portal, he went in search. This place is called the Maze of Dogs and Skulls, and a moment later a dog actually jumped out. Jin Hyuk didn't lose his composure and hit the monster with a bat. He flew to the side straight into another monster. The guy's level increased from 48 to 49, which proved that this dog was much weaker than the orc. A second later, a whole pack of such dangerous dogs began to approach the guy. They immediately began the attack and rushed towards the guy. But for him, it was just an opportunity to gain a lot of experience. He began to throw the dogs around as if they were little puppies. After a couple of minutes, Jin Hyuk dealt with all the dogs. The guy's level gradually increased from 49 to 74, and 25 dogs appeared in his inventory. Considering the price of the kobold's body, he has already earned over 200 million. Money seemed to flow to him like a river today. But then the guy remembered the gnome's task, who would probably shout and ask why the guy hadn't returned for so long. Jin Hyuk was so happy that he almost forgot about the mithril, so he quickly went off to search. He wandered into some strange dungeon and was a little confused. And then right in front of me I saw a fire and silhouettes in it. They were fire skeletons, not very friendly. The guy thought with displeasure that it was logical to encounter skeletons in a labyrinth of dogs and skulls. Moreover, you can't make much money on skeletons. The guy jumped up and irritably ran into the monsters. He broke off the top of one with one blow, but skeletons do not feel pain. He continued to fight the headless guy. It was unexpected, but then an idea came to the guy's head. To destroy a skeleton, you must first destroy the core inside it. This guy did it with just one punch. But when he turned around, he saw a new skeleton. There were too many of them, and the guy thought that he wouldn't have time to repel the attacks. But it was definitely worth a try, so he rushed into the attack. With his strength, he could easily deal with skeletons. After some time, he looked around and realized that all the skeletons were destroyed. This is definitely a reason to celebrate his victory. Moreover, the guy reached level 100 and could now choose a class, which is determined automatically based on the hunter's latest actions. He himself was surprised by his level and thought about changing his class to a warrior. But then Jin Hyuk saw a curious notice that after subduing countless undead, he had been promoted to a priest. In the end, the guy managed to get the mithril that the dwarf asked for. He was surprised that Jin Hyuk was completely fine, even though the guy had a sore back. The dwarf said he thought the boy would meet his end there, but he was perfectly fine. To these words, Jin Hyuk objected, saying that he was barely alive. The dwarf chuckled and said that getting mithril wasn't that hard, and decided to look into the bag the guy had brought. Jin Hyuk replied that everything was there, although he hid a little for himself, since the metal is really very expensive. Then the dwarf decided to start making weapons and asked the guy if there was any function that he especially needed. After thinking, he replied that he had an offensive weapon, so a defensive one would be useful, and it would be good if it were invisible. Looking at the guy, the dwarf said that he would fulfill this order very easily because it was as easy as pie. Sometime later, the guy was already sleeping in his bed when his alarm went off on his phone for 8:30 p.m. Jin Hyuk sighed in displeasure but still stood up. After all, he slept for 6 hours and now he felt light. It was hot in the workshop, so he got tired and went to bed. It's good that the guy thought to set the alarm, hoping that everything was over. Arriving at the forge, Jin Hyuk noticed how the dwarf put down his hammer. Wiping the sweat from his face, the satisfied dwarf said that the job was done. Only after that did he feel the guy's presence. The dwarf asked Jin Hyuk where he had been and where he had gone, and he replied that he had just been walking and got lost. Then the dwarf presented the guy with his new armor, which should be worn under clothes, so it is invisible. Taking the armor, Jin Hyuk did not quite understand its essence but decided to try it on. It was a mithril chainmail, light and durable, made by a dwarf with special care. As soon as Jin Hyuk put on the protection, the dwarf immediately struck the guy to test how his invention worked. The guy flew to the side, but, surprisingly, magical and physical damage was reduced by 50%. Then the smiling dwarf asked how strong the chainmail was, and although the test was brutal, Jin Hyuk responded in surprise that nothing even hurt him. The blow could have broken his ribs, but he's okay. So with this armor and a new bat, the guy's life will increase several times. Then the joyful boy ran to his new friend, pleased that he was lucky enough to meet this gnome. He asked the guy if he liked his work, and Jin Hyuk, naturally, was delighted and wanted to thank the dwarf. But he turned away and said that he didn't need gratitude. And then he brought a strange barrel and told the guy to take it. Jin Hyuk accepted the strange gift and asked what it was. The gnome kept the intrigue, but then finally told what was what. Soon the next day arrived, or rather, the next morning. Jin Hyuk sat in his home and drank liquid from a small cup. It was the same drink that the dwarf had given him, and it really did taste delicious. Looking into the barrel, Jin Hyuk wondered how soju could have such a taste. And then I remembered the dwarf's words that if you pour anything into a mithril barrel, the taste intensifies, so even soju becomes tastier. The guy was surprised to think that the usual soju became a completely different drink when it was in this barrel. In the evening, Kang Jin Hyuk called the people he sold his goods to into the office. And then Chun said Cholu that he has goods for sale again. The happy boss asked what kind of monsters were these this time. Jin Hyuk replied that these were goblin bodies in one drink, and the second one surprised Chun very much. Cholya. At this time, the events near the 20th Titan Guild Gate in the new hunter training area were also proceeding quickly, and the training of the new recruits was over. Suddenly, one of them shouted to the deputy that they had a big problem. The lizards began to advance through the strange gates again. There were 3 times more of them than the whole team had just caught. One of the people said that they couldn't handle them alone, so they needed to ask other hunters for help. The deputy only arrogantly thought that he would not give his prey to others, since for the sake of his prestige, he needed to stop them with his own forces. Then he told his subordinate to stop talking like a weakling, because they could definitely handle it. Swinging his sword, the deputy ordered everyone to stop the monsters and prepare for battle. At the same time, Mr. Kang Jin Hyuk was congratulated on his promotion at the bureau. The girl handing him the card said that he now had a rather rare class that used healing skills. Now Jin Hyuk was a C-rank hunter, which he was very happy about, since it was said that the guild accepted healers, even if they were just healing from afar. But before he had time to think about his career, he saw a strange man. He was covered in bruises and scratches and asked if there was a free doctor here. Jin Hyuk, not believing his eyes, raised his hand and said that he was a doctor, and then asked if a doctor with only a C rank would be suitable for a man. The man agreed and immediately told the boy to follow him. It turned out that Jin Hyuk's rank was better than he thought. During this time, the fight with the huge lizards did not stop. The newcomers fought against a large stream of enemies. One of the guys noticed his friend who had fallen next to him. The guy immediately ran up and tried to help the other newbie get up. But while they were fiddling around, a monster flew right at them. And if it weren't for the deputy, who was nearby and destroyed the lizard, the consequences could have been tragic. By destroying one monster, the man protected his students. And then he ordered them to gather, otherwise this would be their last fight. The students charged straight at the monsters, causing a whole crowd of fighters to form. The deputy did not like this, because he understood that everyone believed in Suman, but this would not help them. And then, jumping up from his seat, the man rushed into the attack again. But then strange figures appeared behind them, and none of the newcomers could recognize them. One of the guys turned to Jin Hyuk, who was with them, and told him to do as everyone else did, that is, not to interfere. When the guy asked if he could help with anything, the guy replied that he could just give them moral and physical strength. Jin Hyuk didn't really care what he did, since he would get paid anyway, but the fact that he could heal when he came to help surprised him. He directed his power at the warriors fighting the lizards. They were healed and regained their strength almost instantly. This helped them defeat their enemies and become stronger. One of the guys suddenly called the healers and shouted that he needed help too. Jin Hyuk pointed out that the battle was endless, and it would be better to contact another guild and ask for help. The guy standing next to Jin Hyuk agreed with this. Jin Hyuk himself understood that if things continued like this, they could be destroyed. But then the guy felt that someone was approaching him from behind. Then he realized that it was a monster that had decided to attack him from behind. The guy understood that there were only doctors behind him, and no one would help him. Then the guy grabbed the bat himself, already ready to defend the owner, and decided that he had to protect the other doctors. This was not the only lizard, as a crowd of monsters had already gathered behind. The doctors were scared because they didn't know how to fight monsters. Jin Hyuk said that the doctors should focus on their work, and he will stop these monsters himself. The healers were surprised because the guy is the same priest as they are, so they need to ask for help from the Titan Guild. But the Titans had a hard time dealing with even the monsters that were ahead. Then the guy grabbed the bat and ran straight to the monsters and told the priest not to worry, because he knew what he was doing. After hitting the monster, Jin Hyuk thought he was really worried at first, but everything started to work out better than he thought. He managed to knock one of the monsters down with his hand and pressed him to the ground. The next second, the bat went straight into the monster, and Jin Hyuk wondered if it was worth it. Turning around, the guy noticed one of the healers, who continued to heal the fighters, towards whom the monster was rushing. The guy immediately turned around and headed towards the attacking monster, as he realized that he couldn't let his guard down. A moment later, he jumped up and ran. He swung and was about to strike the lizard. This is what he did, saying that the monster should not run away. After this, the guy decided to go back. But suddenly he felt another monster approaching him from behind. He mocked Jin Hyuk as his attack didn't work. The sword almost touched the guy, but he was confident. He stated that this monster was starting to irritate him and struck again. One of the doctors, watching the guy fight, wondered in surprise, how could an ordinary doctor be capable of such a thing? He was curious how Jin Hyuk could defeat monsters. The other healer, after thinking, replied that thanks to him they could calmly continue their work and focus on the goal, and the second healer agreed with him. But one question interested everyone. Why do the lizards behave this way? But suddenly a strong hunter appeared before them and destroyed the lizard with one blow. It was Seo Sang-ho, the leader of the Titan Guild, who only now noticed that the monsters were attacking the healers from behind. Looking at the destroyed monsters, the S-rank hunter asked Jin Hyuk if this was his work. The guy answered that it was. The healers turned around and immediately recognized the leader of the Titan Guild. But, realizing that the monsters were finished, one of the doctors said that now they could go home. Seo Sang-ho jumped up and said that he had urgent business to attend to. But as he ran away, he told Jin Hyuk that they would definitely compensate him for his work. As the man walked away, the boy looked after him in surprise, realizing that this was the leader of the Titan Guild. Jin Hyuk knew that S-rank hunters were strong, but it was clear at first glance that he was perfect. He is so strong that it's as if he himself is a monster. He landed with a high jump right on the battlefield, ready to fight, after which he said that all his guys were great. All the guild members were delighted and inspired to see their leader. The disgruntled deputy asked how the leader knew about this, and one of the guys replied that he was the one who warned the leader, Seo Sang-ho, since there is nothing wrong with asking for help from the guild. Then the leader ordered everyone who had run out of strength to step aside, since he himself would now lead the capture. Therefore, if everyone understands, then it's better for them to disperse quickly. Someone asked the leader to wait, but he had already activated his energy and was rushing towards the monsters. He was determined, and he looked very dangerous. Before reaching his target, Sang-ho made the lizards around one of the guild members burst into flames. The monsters growled, trying to escape, but it was too late. The guild members looked with admiration at the leader who had single-handedly destroyed so many monsters, but it wasn't for nothing that he was an S-rank hunter. Jin Hyuk, looking at how Sang-ho bypassed his allies and destroyed only monsters, realized that even with his strength, he was very weak compared to this man. The last remaining monsters soon fell as well. The leader, standing among the bodies, said that the hunt was over, so they needed to check the number of monsters and take care of everything. Then Sang-ho turned to his deputy, An Do-yoon. He called him names and angrily asked if he really thought he could figure it out on his own, if he really wanted his own end. And Do-yoon replied that if you ask others for help, the guild's reputation may fall. But Sang-ho angrily shouted that the issue here was not about the guild at all, but rather about the deputy's own reputation, which he did not want to tarnish. An Do-yoon only responded in a relaxed manner that the leader's words were too harsh. Sang-ho wanted to answer, but they were interrupted by one of the guild boys. He pointed to the doctors and said that they had helped them and now they needed to be sent away. Then the leader told Do-yoon that they weren't finished yet and would finish talking when they returned to the guild. Approaching the healers, the leader bowed, apologizing for the late introduction, and said that his name was Seo Sang-ho and he was the leader of the Titan Guild. He was grateful to the guys that all the members of his guild were safe. He especially thanked Jin Hyuk, who single-handedly dealt with the ambush lizard, which means the guy has good skills. The leader then asked the hero's name, and the guy introduced himself as Kang Jin-hyuk. Sanho asked if the guy was a member of any guild. He replied that he wasn't yet. Then Sanho offered to join his guild without asking for a fee. But then an indignant Do-yoon appeared in the crowd, telling the leader to wait. He said that he remembers Jin-hyuk, and he was only a D-rank hunter recently, so it's just luck that he's a priest, but it's going to get harder. But then, Do-yoon turned around in fear to see the leader who addressed him sternly. Sang-ho shouted that if it weren't for this guy, his men would have died. And it was Jin-hyuk who saved the guild's reputation, which would have been lost precisely because of the actions of the foolish Do-yoon. All the guys around who were members of the guild looked at this scene in surprise. Jin-hyuk chuckled and realized that the guild leader also cared a lot about his reputation. But then Sang-ho told Do-yoon that if he understood everything, then he should apologize to Jin-hyuk. The guy was surprised by this order, but he interrupted Do-yoon, saying that he would refuse the offer to join the guild because he could not trust such a deputy. An indignant Do-yoon was ready to tear Jin-hyuk to pieces after hearing these words. Out of anger, he released his energy and directed it at the guy he wanted to teach a lesson. But as soon as he approached Jin-hyuk, a bat flew out of his inventory. Do-yoon in an instant and dealt him a powerful blow. Later, in the guild staff, one of the members showed the news that Do-yoon had lost consciousness in a fight with a C-rank hunter. Something had to be done about this news. The guild members discussed that they should bring this hunter to refute everything, as this was too harsh a punishment even for Do-yoon, who had made a mistake. If they remain silent, it will harm the reputation of the Titan Guild. Putting the cup of coffee on the table, Sang-ho replied that it was not that person who had ruined the reputation, but Do-yoon himself. Because of his authority, recruits almost died, and what's more, he even attacked the man who helped their guild. The leader thought that this was a good enough reason to remove him from his position as the vice guild leader. So Sang-ho decided to ask the others what they thought. No one really answered anything, so Sang-ho said that it was enough to waste time on nonsense and suggested that they close the matter. After this, the leader let his subordinates go. And Sang-ho himself thought that Kang Jin-hyuk was not just a C-rank hunter, and before he became even stronger, he needed to pull him over to his side. At this time, Jin-hyuk was sitting at home and looking at the screen of his mobile phone. He was surprised that he spent too much of the money he earned. If he had known that this would happen, he would have taken the extra reward when it was offered. But, in principle, all this was not so important. The guy has another source of income anyway, and these are the very portals to the dungeons where the monsters live. But the ordinary monsters he caught before were no longer enough, especially since he had become much stronger now. That's why now he needs someone more helpful and stronger. Then Jin-hyuk rushed into the cave where he had met the skeletons earlier. He went quite deep, but so far he hasn't noticed anything interesting. But suddenly the guy felt the monster approaching. Jin-hyuk turned around, looking for the one making the sounds. It was a huge orc that jumped out of the shadows and swung at the guy. But Jin-hyuk knew what to do and how to act. He was again dissatisfied with the enemy sneaking up from behind and decided to attack him. The bat hit the monster, which flew back. The orc was just right for the guy. If he destroys a few more of these, then he won't have to worry about money. By beckoning the orcs who had come running with his finger, Jin-hyuk provoked them to attack. For the guy who rushed into the attack, this was real money. Thus, the guy had 20 orcs in his inventory. A joyful Jin-hyuk noted that now he can easily destroy 20 orcs. Then the guy decided to go deeper into the dungeon and see where the long staircase led. The place looked like some kind of temple, but it was a bit gloomy. This was the third level of the dungeon, Temple Protector's Labyrinth, which was Jin-hyuk's target. Further in the warp gates, the third level was registered, but the guy was surprised that he did not see monsters. Perhaps it was some kind of safe zone. But then the ground beneath Jin-hyuk's feet began to shake, which caught his attention. A huge hand suddenly burst out of the ground, trying to grab the guy. Looking at the monster in surprise, Jin-hyuk realized that he had expected this. There couldn't be any monsters in this place, but now he jumped away from one of them. The monster swung at Jin-hyuk from behind, and he knew he wouldn't have time to react. But his weapon, as always, came to his aid and protected its owner. Jin-hyuk blocked the monster, but it easily broke free. The guy jumped back and slid his feet along the ground. Jin-hyuk didn't understand what was going on, as such power and agility could be dangerous if the guy wasn't careful. But what kind of monster was this? Having looked at him closely, the guy was very surprised. The monster's body was made of stone, so it was almost impossible to injure it. The guy had heard of these before. It was a monster created artificially, so it was a real golem. In that case, Jin-hyuk rushed forward and attacked the monster, but did not hit it. The monster twitched, and judging by the fact that he fell for the primitive deception, his intelligence was rather low. The physical characteristics are excellent, but this golem is not on friendly terms with his head, so it can be easily defeated. Nothing will stop the guy from defeating this monster. And so it happened, for the golem soon fell. The guy thought that it turned out that there was nothing special about him, and he was only worrying in vain. But suddenly the stones began to tremble, and the golem seemed to rise, beginning to rise. Surprised, Jin-hyuk stared at the monster to see what was going on. and he seemed to come to life and began to roar loudly again. Jin Hyuk was frightened and thought that even though he had defeated the golem, he was still alive. But then the guy remembered that this monster would not die until he crushed its core, which was inside the stone golem. This was a mistake, so Jin Hyuk decided to retreat and think about his strategy a little later and attack again. But the monster suddenly emerged from under the ground and grabbed the guy by the leg. But it was not the golem that stood before him, but a second one, another monster. But before he had time to come to his senses, the whistle of an arrow was heard. She came out of nowhere and hit the golem straight. The next moment, the golem seemed to explode, creating a rain of stones. But the second golem was in no hurry to let go of Jin Hyuk, who could come under fire. Then the boy realized that the core was in the middle of the chest and swung at the golem holding his leg. And then, like a sword, he struck the goblin in the chest and smashed the stones to the sides. Finally getting to his feet, Jin Hyuk realized where he needed to attack. Looking back at the remains, which were stones, the guy exhaled, as it was hard for him. If it weren't for that arrow, this could have been his last battle. But I wondered who helped him. Maybe it was Uncle Dwarf who came down. But then the outline of a girl became visible through the dust. It was definitely not his uncle, but who was she? Moreover, she has very strange ears and it looks like she is an elf. While Jin Hyuk was thanking her for her help, the girl rushed towards him. He wanted to express words of gratitude but did not have time. The girl grabbed him by the collar and said that she was seeing him in this dungeon for the first time. Then the girl asked who he was and where he came from. Where is he? No one wears clothes like that. How long has he been locked up in this dungeon and when did he come here? Jin Hyuk was completely confused by so many questions and replied that he only came here today. The girl was surprised by this answer and asked if he was telling the truth. The guy said he wasn't lying. The girl asked in surprise if there was really an exit to the dungeon. The guy answered that it really was. Then the girl happily let the guy go. Because of this, he fell right in front of her, and she looked at him confidently. Gripping her bow tighter, the girl said that she seemed to have finally found a way to get out of here. The guy got angry and shouted, "What is she doing?" The girl, in a commanding voice, told the guy to take her to the exit through which he had entered here. Dissatisfied, Jin Hyuk did not understand who she was and why she was ordering him around. But by the way, she was quite beautiful. The girl added that naturally she would give a reward, since she was a mercenary of the white gold rank, and she could be trusted. This information surprised the guy. After that, the girl deigned to introduce herself as a half-elf, Lucia, and then she asked Jin Hyuk if he had heard her name. The guy replied that he had never heard of it in his life. Lucia looked at him in surprise, as she thought she was quite famous, but oh well. She introduced herself again and showed the sign of her white gold rank. It was a real mercenary badge that Lucia proudly showed off. But the guy had no idea what it was and looked at the badge with indifference. The girl looked at the guy again with disappointment, thinking that he came from a remote village, and then she asked where he was from. The guy replied that he was from Seoul, and then asked where the girl came from, since he didn't remember elves living in Korea. The girl did not know such places, as she heard these names for the first time, and thought that that crazy magician had succeeded and was able to move to another dimension. Then she asked the guy if it was the first time he came here, or if he came here today, but he replied that he had been here several times already. The girl said that it means that the crazy mage managed to use the magic of moving between dimensions. To put it simply, it seems that this dungeon was transported to this world from another dimension, all because of one crazy mage. The guy was surprised and asked if it was really possible, but the girl herself didn't know. Then Lucia said that it was even good, because if he managed to move between spaces, it meant that it would be possible to return back. It was only necessary to improve the magical techniques. Jin Hyuk thought about it and realized that he knew something was wrong here. It turned out that this dungeon was from this world, and it would not be beneficial for him if the dungeon went back to its own dimension. Then the guy asked Lucia in disappointment if she wanted to send the dungeon back to her world. The girl replied that it wouldn't work now, although there was such an opportunity here. She said that there was a room on this floor with something hidden in it. Lucia accidentally found it when she was looking for a way to get back. So she asked the guy to help her. He asked in surprise what she needed help with. The girl said that to get into the secret room, you need to kill the boss monster. But Jin Hyuk asked why he should help Lucia. The girl replied that she would then tell him something important and also give him a reward for the boss. These conditions were not bad, so Jin Hyuk thought about it and then agreed. He began to attack the orcs standing in their way. He helped Lucia move forward, but the girl did not lag behind either. Her powers were great and she helped Jin Hyuk fight. Within moments, she had already killed several orcs. Jin Hyuk also wielded his bat as well as a sword. In the end, they managed to defeat a whole crowd of orcs. The last monster fell face down on the ground. Jin Hyuk thought that Lucia was much stronger than he thought, and the girl said out loud that the guy was stronger than she thought. Jin Hyuk understood that fighting the elf would be unprofitable. First, they needed to unite and see the situation. Therefore, the guy answered in a friendly manner that it was nothing to him. Jin Hyuk and Lucia went further down into the dungeon. The guy asked how much further they had to go, but Lucia replied that they were about halfway there. At this point, the guy's stomach began to rumble, apparently from hunger. Then he suggested that the girl take a rest, especially since he was hungry. Moreover, there will definitely be no monsters here. The girl, having given in to persuasion, agreed. Jin Hyuk took out a chocolate bar and began to open it. While he was eating chocolate, Lucia was drinking water from her flask. Jin Hyuk noticed that the girl had not eaten anything, so he handed his bar to Lucia and invited her to try it. The girl immediately asked him to address her as you, but Jin Hyuk replied that he couldn't do that to someone older than him. Lucia immediately took offense and pointed an arrow at him. By elven standards, she is still very young. The guy immediately began to justify himself, saying that he didn't mean it that way, and agreed to address her informally. Lucia then added that she doesn't eat just anything. But once she tried the bar, there was no stopping her. The girl began to gobble them up one after another. After finishing the last chocolate, she asked Jin Hyuk if he had any more, but he shrugged and said that it was the last one. Lucia was upset because she wanted to enjoy the food she liked more, but the guy replied that 3 boxes should have been enough. Licking her lips, the girl said that since they had already filled their stomachs, they needed to continue on their way. She stood up and called Jin Hyuk to follow her. The saddest thing for the guy was that now his supplies were empty. They walked further and reached the boss monster room. In front of them were huge doors that they had to enter. Jin Hyuk reminded about his reward and asked what exactly Lucia was looking for. She replied that the magician probably left his notes in this room. As he thought about it, the guy had a thought. Maybe he shouldn't have agreed to help? But Lucia already told Kang Jin Hyuk to get ready since the boss is approaching, so they need to finish this. There are no other monsters, so Lucia said she could handle it alone. Jin Hyuk was surprised and couldn't believe that she was going to fight the monster approaching them alone. This monster looked huge and very strong, but Lucia said that was nonsense because she was going to tell something important. The girl told him to look very carefully. Her technique is called aura. The guy looked in surprise at Lucia, who had already pulled the bowstring. Lucia aimed 3 glowing arrows straight at the monster. They flew right on target under the boy's surprised gaze. But the girl looked confident, as if she knew that she would succeed. Reaching the target, the arrows exploded, hitting the monster. The monster fell to the ground from such a blow. Jin Hyuk was surprised how such a fragile girl could take out such a huge monster with one blow. Then the boy realized that Lucia wanted to tell him about an amazing technique called aura. Jin Hyuk was surprised and asked if the girl could teach him a technique of such incredible power. She replied that she had promised, so she would do it. Smiling of her own accord, she asked the guy how he liked her skill. Jin Hyuk naturally liked this technique, which he could not even imagine. But Lucia said that first we need to finish with this boss, the monster. Jin Hyuk said to deal with it. The girl asked the guy if he knew where the core was. He replied that he remembered it. He then swung his bat straight at the monster, specifically at its chest, after which he dealt a crushing blow there, which he had recently learned. The blow was weak, so the monster's body only cracked. The guy looked at this in surprise and thought that it was weak, and one blow might not be enough. He noticed how the monster started to move and attack him. Then he used his new weapon, the sacred shield. Looking at this, Lucia realized that this technique was also an aura, and Jin Hyuk was already striking one after another. He understood that if it doesn't work out the first time, then you have to try again. He decided to hit until he broke it and reached the core. Blow after blow, he approached his target. His last blow was the strongest and most powerful. He gathered all his strength into a fist and delivered a powerful blow to the monster's body. Finally, his defense gave in, and the bat was able to go even further, after which the monster seemed to split into several parts, as a result of which the guy's level increased from 150 to 185. The guy apologized to Lucia since it took a little longer and asked if she would teach him how to use his aura now. But the girl looked at him in surprise and said that he had just used her, which surprised Jin Hyuk. Lucia said that he had just changed his aura with divine power, but the guy asked if she was talking about a skill. The girl replied that she didn't know what it was, but it seemed like he could learn it much faster than she thought. Jin Hyuk, who was happy with this news, was inspired by this idea. Lucia said that the guy was a priest class, and the divine power was a modified aura. Jin Hyuk said, "Can he use it now?" The girl replied that she did not know, since it depended on how he would use the technique. The guy was ready to start, but Lucia said that they had some conditions. And while they were discussing them, the next day had already arrived. Sang-ho asked one of his employees where the strange phenomena were observed. She replied that it happened in the Gangnam Station area. This was all noticed yesterday. Within 5 days, strong monsters will appear. The girl herself was the leader's secretary, and her name was Lee Henna. Then the leader said that he thought that their guild couldn't handle it alone. The secretary asked what the leader was proposing, since the other major guilds were overseas, and they were the only ones left in Korea now. Sang-ho asked in frustration why it happened in the center of Seoul. The girl replied that she was currently looking for hunters who work in Korea as freelancers, but the leader didn't think that there was anyone normal among those who remained. But suddenly he remembered Kang Jin Hyuk and said that he knew a good hunter. This greatly interested the secretary. and while she was walking to the office, her boss left her because he had some business to attend to. The girl asked where Sanho was heading, but the leader replied that he would be back soon, and it would be better for the girl to pass on the request from the association to the workers. Looking after the leader, Lee Hyun thought with annoyance that he, as always, was doing things his own way. At this time, Jin Hyuk was walking down the street with a box of chocolates and candy bars in his hands. Well, then someone called out to him and the guy turned around. I recognized the leader of the Titan Guild, who approached the guy and asked what he had bought in such large quantities, but he replied that I myself do not understand what he is doing now. Sang-ho asked if Jin Hyuk had thought about the offer. The boy replied that if the leader meant joining the guild, he had already explained everything. But suddenly Sang-ho asked, what about a mercenary he would pay generously? This proposal interested the guy more, so he said that he would think about it. After some time, Lucia was already chewing the candy bars the guy had bought her. She sat happily, unpacking one candy bar after another, saying that each one was tastier than the other, and the guy, watching her, thought that there was no such food in her world. Finally, the girl grabbed her stomach and exhaled, saying that she was very full. Jin Hyuk asked Lucia why she was eating in this basement. They had already destroyed the boss monster. The girl then told Jin Hyuk to look at the intricate pattern on the ceiling, and then she said it was called a magic circle, which the guy had never heard of. Then Lucia chuckled because Jin Hyuk had never heard of a magic circle, but then added that he should just remember that for her, this dungeon is his world. The girl said that she would be here for a while to do her research, so she had one request for Jin Hyuk. The guy was surprised, but Lucia said that if he wanted to learn how to control the aura, he would have to bring her a lot of chocolate cookies. This condition was very lenient towards the guy, so he agreed. They shook hands, after which the guy asked if they could start now. Lucia took the surprised Jin Hyuk's hands and said that this was the fastest way to master the aura, so Kang Jin Hyuk needed to concentrate now. Then she added that now streams of aura would begin to flow into the guy's body, and he should remember this feeling. Jin Hyuk was focused and watched the actions of the Fa very carefully. A strange energy suddenly appeared on his hand, which was a good sign. Then Lucia said that now they could finally begin. Looking at the flow of energy, the guy felt something flowing from the girl's hands into his body. It was a very strange and new feeling for him. He seemed to merge with infinity, wandering through strange labyrinths. It was more like vessels that emitted some kind of inner power. Suddenly his eyes widened and he realized that he felt an aura. This was a completely new sensation for him. Lucia was surprised to think that the guy had some good abilities. The movement of his divine power was simply enormous, and she thought that today he would be able to master the basics. Jin Hyuk, looking at his hand, didn't really understand what just happened, but it seemed like he understood the principle. The girl shifted her feet and at first didn't know what to say. But then she said that she saw that he was not at all untalented and would most likely be able to remember this movement. This made the guy happy and he got serious. Lucia started to walk away. Then Jin Hyuk asked where she was going because she had to investigate this magic circle, but the girl replied that the problem with the circle could not be solved now anyway. It would take time. And then she added that it would be faster if he mastered the aura first. Jin Hyuk asked if there was any way to make it faster. Lucia replied that such a method of course exists, and it is practice. After these words, Jin Hyuk began to train hard. He spent a lot of time in the dungeon and destroyed goblins. Sometimes he encountered wild dogs, which also became his victims. His speed and agility became stronger each time. Thus, in one go, he collected 25 goblins and 14 kobolds. All of them appeared in his inventory in an instant. After that, the guy shouted that Lucia said that she would tell him how to use the aura, so why did she just make him hunt monsters, and even alone? The girl replied that she promised to share mana with him so that he would understand the principle. The rest he must learn himself. All that remains for him is to activate the aura with the help of divine power and master the technique. Moreover, there is nothing better than practice to do this. The irritated guy replied that he should have said so right away. How could they just leave him with these monsters? Golem burst out from under the ground. And while Jin Hyuk was thinking about how to deal with him, the elf said that a person is more concentrated in a critical situation. The guy needs to concentrate and feel the divine power he is using. That shield was also summoned using aura. Once he understands the principle, he can easily master the technique. Right now, Jin Hyuk only needs to think about the feeling when he used the shield. Then the guy used his technique again and materialized a shield in front of him. But he still didn't understand what he should feel because of this skill. But the next second he realized that he definitely felt something. There was a strange feeling, as if some energy had entered him from the outside, and he felt it gathering in his left hand, which activated the skill. Jin Hyuk thought that this was divine power, but the golem didn't care about his discovery and continued to attack. Then the guy decided to try again and activated the sacred shield again. But what happened next surprised him a little. The shape of the sacred account was very strange and not unusual. Could this really be the aura? But the golem, without wasting much effort, broke this shield and the guy flew back. While he was flying, he took out the bat and thought with annoyance that he didn't even have time to rest. Lucia told the guy to focus on the sensations and not make stupid mistakes. But Jin Hyuk replied that he did everything as she said. But then the system sent him a strange notification. Out of the blue, he had a skill, using the first stage of divine power. It prescribed that when using divine power, the guy would receive sacred energy. But suddenly Lucia pulled the bowstring and said that at the stage of training, the aura golem can be difficult to handle, so she will help him here. But Jin Hyuk told Lucia to step aside since he could handle the monster himself. There was a note that it was a composite video, but the fact that the witch's hideout had been cleaned up was an undeniable fact. Having dodged the blow, the guy decided to concentrate and remember those very feelings. He picked up his bat and decided to put all his mana into it. Then, using all his energy, he struck the golem. The monster fell to the ground, crumbling into small stones and small boulders. Landing on the ground, Jin Hyuk thought he almost got it, but he needed more concentration to try again. At that moment, he managed to use a small amount of aura power. This skill level is F. The skill effect allows you to strengthen your body or weapon with aura. The damage caused by an aura cannot be compensated by anything other than the same aura. Jin Hyuk took advantage of this by gathering a huge amount of power. Lucia couldn't believe her eyes as the guy started using aura too early. Jin Hyuk's bat, like a sword, reached the golem's core, destroying it. Standing on top of his defeated enemy, Jin Hyuk breathed a sigh of relief. And after this, the stones around him began to glow, moving into the inventory. The system showed that Jin Hyuk had mastered the skill of using divine power, and he was now at the third stage and had improved his precision strike and durability. The guy understood that with the help of divine power, he would now be able to use new skills, but it was very tough. Lucia coming down to him and telling him that he had done well. The guy replied that he seemed to understand the principle, but now he was wondering what the girl herself thought. Lucia knew the guy was capable, but she didn't think he could use aura so quickly in battle. The girl's thoughtful face made Jin Hyuk think he had done something wrong, but Lucia replied that he had done well. She had intended to tell him in a few words and leave it at that, but things had turned out quite differently. Jin Hyuk knew that thanks to Lucia's training, he now had 3 passive skills and 1 active skill that he could use in battle. Having taken out the arrow, Lucia asked for the sake of decency whether Jin Hyuk had rested enough. And then, without waiting for an answer, she aimed straight at the guy who was already ready to defend himself and asked what she was doing. Lucia replied that they needed to move on. Then she released an arrow, which flew very close to the guy, frightening him. The arrow didn't hit Jin Hyuk, it just flew past and hit the stone door at the other end of the wall, after which the entrance exploded and was covered with smoke for some time. But suddenly strange silhouettes began to appear there. These were huge orcs who came out under the statement of the girl, who was sure that if you started, you need to finish the job. Jin Hyuk thought with annoyance that this elf was worse than any demon. But it was too late to choose, so he only tightened his grip on his bat. And then he said, if he had known that this would happen, he would have taken the raspberry potion with him. But there was no choice, so the guy decided to fight to the end. After a hard battle, the next day arrived. Kang Jin Hyuk sat in the office of the man he sold the monsters to, drinking soda. When he put it on the table, the man asked what happened to him. The guy replied that nothing special had happened, but it had been very difficult for him. The man asked what was the matter because the guy looked like he had just come from a battlefield. He then said that he would buy everything that Jin Hyuk had brought, namely the bodies of goblins, kobolds, and orcs. But there was still one unresolved issue regarding the alcohol that the guy brought last time, which the dwarf gave him. After some small negotiations, they parted ways. Jin Hyuk was given a whole box of traditional soju, which began to be bought up en masse. With such popularity, you don't have to worry about money, but only sell this drink. Selling soju for 150,000 when stores were selling it for 2,000 sounded very tempting, as if Jin Hyuk was Robin Hood. But the heavier the wallet, the lighter the soul, and it feels like all worries have disappeared. Jin Hyuk hasn't felt that for a long time. One day, when he came home, he collapsed on the bed, thinking that today had been very hard. He thought that for several days now he would only sleep. And then he remembered Lucia, and how, when talking to her, he felt that she was not of this world. The skills that are normal for a guy are simply not present in her world. To activate, she uses not words but a flow of mana. That's why she can't use techniques as easily, but she can use them in different ways. As he fell asleep, the boy thought that he should take note of this, but in the end he gave in and closed his eyes, falling asleep. So he slept for quite a few hours, practically without moving. But then he was awakened by a disaster warning. The streets were talking about an emergency situation, forcing everyone on the street to quickly run for cover. Looking at his phone screen, Jin Hyuk decided to find out what date it was today. Looking out the window, he guessed that today was the day the monsters appeared. But it happened faster than expected. But the guy didn't want to know or do anything, so he fell back onto the bed, thinking that some guild or association would sort it out themselves. Previously, this was a chance for Jin Hyuk to kill at least a small monster, but now, while he is clearing the dungeon, it does not make much sense, so it is better to sleep. But suddenly a notification came to the guy's phone. It was an announcement from the Hunters Association that due to the emergency situation and the invasion of monsters, a reward of 3 times the usual rate for the destruction was guaranteed. The guy immediately got out of bed, inspired by this proposal. As soon as he went outside, he immediately began to use his aura. So he summoned his bat and headed resolutely towards the target. He was clearly determined to fight monsters that would definitely be in trouble. Usually, monster invasions occur randomly, but there are also regular appearances. For example, like now, when people were running away in panic, and the police showed them the way and they were guarded by military vehicles. Once a month, around the end of the month, such large invasions occur. The soldiers protecting the citizens put up special shields and said that if the monsters broke through the wall, they would no longer be able to control them, so they should focus on defense. But suddenly, So Sang-ho appeared unexpectedly, ready to protect people. After driving away all the monsters with one blow, the Titan Guild leader said that they needed to maintain a line of defense, and he and the top-ranked hunters would deal with the monsters. But the leader himself understood that there were too many monsters and there was no end to them. While all the guild members were defending and holding the line, the leader realized that this was different from the usual monster invasion. And, unfortunately and regrettably, there were no other guilds around. The monsters continued to advance, when suddenly one of them appeared behind one of the fighters. The monster was huge, and the guy didn't have time to react. A huge sledgehammer was already flying straight at him. But suddenly the boy heard someone order him to duck his head. It was San-ho, who was able to destroy the orc with one blow. At that very moment, the leader was advised to be careful, since it was unknown where the monster might come from. The leader understood that the monster's capabilities were limited, and their strength was running out. One of the fighters told the other in surprise that the guild leader dealt with that orc with one blow. The second guy replied that it was cool, so it was not for nothing that he was an S-rank hunter. While the newcomers were holding the line, San-ho was fighting the huge monsters, and the result was quite successful, but the leader was gradually losing strength. His secretary, watching all this, understood that the situation was becoming dangerous, so it would be great if at least one hunter was here who could help him. And as soon as she thought about it, she suddenly remembered the guy her leader had spoken about. It was Jin Hyuk, who destroyed one small monster with one blow of his bat. While the enemy was flying to the side, the guy felt that someone was calling him. He picked up the phone and heard a female voice introduce herself as Lee Hyun-ae, the personal secretary of the Titan Guild leader, and then asked if Kang Jin Hyuk was the guy's plant. While continuing to load the monster bodies into the inventory, the guy asked if the girl was calling because of a monster invasion. Lee Hyun asked him in surprise, how did he know? And the guy replied that he was right nearby, and if they called him, it meant they needed help. The secretary said that the situation was not the best, but the guy replied that he did not think that the guild members would treat him well. But Lee Hyun-na replied that it was important to stop the invasion now, and apologized for the guild members. She also decided to tell about the reward. The guy is free to choose what he wants, as long as the guild gets his help on the terms he himself names. It was a tempting offer, but the guy was attacked from behind by a monster. But it wasn't difficult for the guy to repel the attack, so he turned around sharply and hit the monster with a bat. Then Jin Hyuk put the phone to his ear and said that he wanted to get his reward for the achievements, but for one monster he wanted to get 5 times more. If they agreed, he would destroy all the monsters. Then the secretary replied that apparently he was currently hunting, which meant he was somewhere nearby, so they would discuss the details when they met, especially since she needed to pass something on to the guy. The girl then said that she would wait for him near the mobile phone store in the Ganyan building, where she headed. When she met Jin Hyuk, she said she couldn't promise more than 4 times the price for the monster, but the guy said he was going to get 5 times the price. Lee Hyuna said that Kang Jin Hyuk is a C-rank priest class, so she asked to consider her offer with a reward 4 times the usual. Jin Hyuk shrugged his shoulders and agreed, saying that he would consider him to be making concessions to them. Then Lee Hyun took his hand and put something round in it. The guy became interested and asked what it was. The girl replied that it was a tool that measured the magical power of monsters and converted it into points. They called it in simple terms a monster counter. As they spoke, several monsters gathered around them. Jin Hyuk ordered Lee Hyun to lie down and he repelled the goblins' attacks with one blow. The monsters flew to the side and hit the wall of the kiosk. The monster counter immediately showed that the guy had killed 2 goblins, so 2 points appeared on the screen. Lee Hyun explained that this is how points are awarded depending on the monster's level. Currently, hunters on the front lines have already earned an average of 82 points. If Jin Hyuk expects to earn a decent salary, he should earn more than this amount. Suddenly, the guy asked her if she knew what real healing was. The girl replied that she thought it was the ability to resurrect the dead. Jin Hyuk said that destroying the one who is causing damage is the ultimate healing. So now he prepared to go into battle. and in the battle itself, prove and show what real healing is. As Kang Jin-hyuk walked away, Lee Hyun-ah looked after him and became lost in thought. After all, even if this guy managed to defeat An Do-yoon, his abilities are still small, but she hopes that he will be what the guild leader expects from him. And at this time the bat was already flying into attack. With his small bat, he was able to break the huge monster's weapon, snapping it in half. The huge orc didn't understand how this happened and stared at his broken club. But Jin-hyuk, flying into the air, told the enemy to look at what Lucia had taught him. He decided to use the divine power and activated its third stage. Thus, the blow was very powerful. Looking at this battle, the newbies and Titan guilds wondered who this guy was and why he had so much power. Where could such a hunter come from? And Jin-hyuk thought that with such a technique, he could easily destroy monsters stronger than his level. Everyone watched with delight as the guy who destroyed the orc with one blow fought, so in their eyes he was at least an A-rank hunter. Jin-hyuk replied that the guys were quite right, since he was definitely stronger than an A-rank hunter right now. After that, the guy decided to drink some mana, realizing that thanks to Lucia's training, he was now level 200. Initially, he didn't have enough strength to fight the Or, but if he maintains his mana, he is stronger than the A-Raga hunters. And Jin-hyuk himself has 1,500 of these mana potions in stock. And that meant that all these monsters would become his big profit. The guy was sure of this, so he eagerly rushed at the monsters. But he was not the only one who fought on the battlefield and destroyed orcs. One sharp sword has already managed to destroy a large number of monsters. It was An Do-yoon's sword, which destroyed enemies with great aggression. Looking around, he did not understand what was going on and why there were fewer monsters. But suddenly he noticed how the newcomers were watching the fight of one of the guys, and he thought with annoyance that this was the same hunter who had a low rank, but who even now caught the admiring glances of the newcomers. This made An Do-yoon very angry, and he started yelling at the guys and asking what they were doing. If they've already finished, then let them help the others right now. The boys got scared and rushed to help. An Do-yoon looked at Jin-hyuk and thought, what is this fool doing here? He remembered the humiliating news that had become popular on the internet and had lowered his reputation, and he thought that there must be a limit to impudence, so he wondered how this guy dared to appear here. Although it was good for An Do-yoon, since he wasn't paying attention that day, today he'll teach Jin-hyuk a lesson. The guy, without even looking back, felt that someone was approaching him from behind. So, without even thinking about who it could be, he thrust his bat back, thereby throwing An Do-yoon aside. And then the guy added that he was being pestered by all sorts of psychos again, but he was busy anyway. Jin-hyuk's blow was quite strong and even caused damage to An Do-yoon. At this time, one of the huge monsters continued to attack. Seo Sang-ho looked at him and had a bad feeling about it. His mana was almost at 0, and he was very unlucky that this huge minotaur-like monster appeared right now. The monster had already gone on the attack, while the leader was thinking about how to replenish his mana supply. But suddenly the man felt someone approaching from behind. He saw Jin-hyuk jumping into the air above him, shouting for the leader to rest. The next second, the guy had already grabbed the monster's horn, and with one hand he was able to knock him to the ground, holding onto his horns. Sanho looked at this with great surprise. He was glad that this guy came. The leader was surprised, since Jin-hyuk had only recently reached C rank, and he was already able to take down a minotaur. Still, the leader's instinct did not fail him, and he turned out to be right. Jin-hyuk asked Sang-ho if he could finish off the minotaur. The leader replied that of course the guy could do it, since it was his merit. Swinging his weapon, the guy replied that then he would not refuse such an opportunity. Thus, he destroyed the minotaur and his level increased. Everything around was covered in dust, and the steam waited for it to clear. After which he heard Sanho's footsteps, who happily said that he knew that Kang Jin-hyuk would come to the rescue. The leader said that the guy had helped them a lot, so he thanked him. Jin-hyuk replied that their secretary had called him, and he had just taken the chance to make money, so there was no need to thank him. Sang-ho extended his hand to Jin-hyuk and said that if the boy joined their guild, he would have many such cool opportunities in the future. Sang-ho also added that he will do everything to ensure that the boy receives an award for his achievements, and the man hopes that he will make a positive decision. But Jin-hyuk didn't answer. He just said that first they had to deal with the remaining monsters. Sighing in disappointment, the leader thought that the guy was not so simple. Suddenly, Secretary Lee called the boss and said that something unexpected had happened. Then the girl added that San-ho needed to look up, which he did. Jin-hyuk did the same, but both boys were surprised when they saw the sky covered with clouds. The weather was behaving very strangely. Jin-hyuk asked in surprise, why did the cloud appear only in this place? Moreover, it was an unusual cloud. It looked like there were 1,000 lightning bolts in it. One of them hit the ground, hitting the hunters and monsters at the same time. The second lightning struck right next to Jin-hyuk and Sang-ho. Sang-ho ordered Secretary Lee to report the situation, and the girl replied that this cloud captured the reaction of monsters. Therefore, it is one huge monster. But, despite the fact that there is only one, its body length reaches 500 meters. The monster looked like a huge catfish flying through the sky. His eyes glowed with a bright yellow light, and the brighter they became, the closer the thunderbolt came. One of them flew back next to the leader and Jin Hek. Then Sang-ho asked the hunter Kang Jin-hyuk if he could handle this monster. The guy replied that he thought he could, but first he had to figure out what kind of monster it was. Sang-ho replied that this was the first time he had seen such a huge flying monster, and that his skills wouldn't work at such a height, so he needed to find a way to attack it. The leader then said that they should first head towards the guild to find out the whole situation, and then invited Jin-hyuk to go with him, and the boy agreed. They soon reached the guild headquarters, which looked like a large multi-story building. Strange things were happening near her, and lightning was striking directly onto the ground and equipment. The secretary, who was watching all this on the computer monitor, said that there was no point in a lightning rod. Sang-ho asked how to get close to the monster in the air. The girl replied that they had already tried using drones, but they were unable to fly close because the monster had destroyed them all, making it difficult to approach by air. The monster hits any target within a 1-kilometer radius on the ground and in the air with 100% accuracy. Then Sang-ho said that he would have to attack from an ambush where his lightning could not reach. Jin-hyuk, who was standing nearby, thought that it wouldn't be easy. They needed someone who could destroy the giant monster from a long distance. Suddenly, the guy thought of Lucia, who was shooting a bow, and this gave him an idea. Then he suddenly spoke up, and the leader and his secretary turned to look at him. Jin-hyuk said he thought he had found one way to catch this monster that he had to try. Finally, the guild headquarters decided to hold a meeting. One of the hunters asked the leader if he really trusted this C-rank priest. It was one of the Titan Guild leaders, Han Yeon-seok. He also added that even they couldn't find a way, so it was strange that some small-time hunter suggested it. One of the hunters insisted on renting a helicopter, which would allow them to hit it from 300 meters away. Just get close enough and they could easily destroy it with one blow. Sang-ho said that he already said during the briefing that he destroys the target with 100% probability within a radius of 1 kilometer, so this method will solve this problem. Then the hunter began to make excuses and say that he had misspoke. Then Lee Henna started to speak, deciding that since this was the situation, they would have to wait for help from Getia, but the leader replied that they couldn't rely on them. Getia is a guild that only consists of A-rank mages. With their abilities, they could deal with this monster, but they don't care one bit about the safety of the residents. They will only focus on catching the monster. So if they just watch from the sidelines, there will be less damage. Now the only hope is for Hunter Kang Jin-hyuk. If this doesn't work, the leader will risk his own life and try to get close himself. Yeon-seok thought, silently staring at a point, as he was unsure of the leader's plan. Night fell, made even darker by the clouds hanging over the city. There was still a gate to another dimension in Jin-hyuk's room. He brought Lucia from there, thanking her for agreeing to help. The girl replied that she did not have much to do, so she agreed. Lucia asked in return that the guy get her the sweets of his world, as they had agreed. Once in the city, the girl noticed that the air was very dirty, and it felt like her life was getting shorter with every breath. Surprisingly, Jin-hyuk lives well in this place. The guy replied that there was nothing to be done, we had to live like this, and then asked how a girl could destroy monsters. Looking up, she asked who the guy thought she was. She can hit such a huge monster even with her eyes closed. But the guy asked if she could destroy it because it was a level 300 Leviathan monster, the highest level in history. Lucia said that in that case, Jin-hyuk should help her a little, which surprised the guy a lot. The girl said that the surroundings looked too fragile to withstand her power. So if the guy doesn't want to see the building collapse, then he'd better help her, and there's still one problem that needs to be solved. Then the guy called Sang-ho and asked one question that concerned the monster. It will fall to the ground and destroy the buildings, which is unavoidable. Is the leader prepared for such an outcome? The leader said not to worry about it and focus on the monster. Jin-hyuk said that he understood everything and told Sang-ho to get ready since everything was about to start. Jin-hyuk then told Lucia that he had decided everything and could start preparing, but the girl replied that she didn't have to start. She had been ready for a long time and had done everything, pulling the arrows onto the string of her bow. She said she could shoot at any moment and asked if Jin-hyuk was ready. Having created a shield from the aura, the guy replied that he was ready. Then the girl said that she was shooting. She took a better aim and pulled the arrow even harder. Then she released her fingers and fired 2 arrows from the bow at once. With the help of the shield, the guy blocked the shockwave and kept all the buildings intact. The arrows flew at the monster under the girl's close and satisfied gaze. Jin-hyuk, holding on under the shockwave, was surprised by such power. 2 shells were rapidly approaching the target and very quickly. It was a direct hit, meaning the target was shot down. All the newbies from the guild and titans, as well as the leader, could not believe their eyes that such a huge monster could be destroyed with one blow. Sang-ho thought that Hunter Kang Jin-hyuk was as surprising as always. Jin-hek, having just removed the shield, said that although Lucia said that the power should be restrained, it was very powerful. The guy thought it was even too powerful, as it was as if weak bombs had exploded on the sides of him. Lucia replied that this world was too weak and asked if they couldn't handle such a monster. The guy replied that the girl was simply too strong for this world. But then, looking at her, he said thank you very much. but Lucia reminded him that she wasn't helping for free and gave him his monster counter. And then she added that Jin Hyuk asked to return it when they destroyed the monster. Looking at the device, the guy asked himself, could this really serve as proof? But suddenly Lucia told him to be careful because you shouldn't trust people. When there is a big prize at stake, a person easily loses his mind. For example, she was often betrayed when she was a hunter. But Jin Hyuk told her not to worry because once he noticed something, he wouldn't keep quiet. After some time, an armored jeep was already racing along the road. The leader of the Titan Guild and his secretary were sitting in it. Suddenly the girl looked forward in surprise, recognizing the guy she already knew. It was Jin Hyuk, standing among a large number of military vehicles. At this point, someone called out to Hunter Kang Jin Hyuk by his full name. The voice from the car said that the guy had done something incredible. It was Sang Ho, to whom the boy replied that he was just lucky. Then the leader asked if the boy didn't mind. Let him tell how he managed to destroy the monster? But Jin Hyuk replied that it was a secret. But then an indignant Yong Seok appeared and shouted that this couldn't be a secret. Most likely the guy didn't do it himself, that's why he can't tell. Jin Hyuk then said that if they didn't believe him, they should look at his monster counter. Looking at the 240 points indicated on the counter, the men couldn't believe their eyes, because their guild leader only had 173 points. Lee Hyun-na replied that it was the counter she gave to Hunter Kang Jin Hyuk. Therefore, the probability of fake results is 0. Yeon Seok was indignant again and said that the guy could have provided it later when they gave out the rewards, so there was no need to wave it at them. But the guy replied that the guild leader So Sang-ho had promised him something. It was the guy who caught the monster, so naturally he should take care of the reward himself. But the boss gave his consent to this. Yeon Seok shouted, does this guy even know how much this monster's body is worth? Does he really think his stupid arguments will work on the Titan Guild? If he wants to finish this without any problems, he needs to stop showing off right now. But Han Yeon Seok's objection was interrupted by the guild leader's raised hand. He shouted that the Titan Guild is not in poverty, so there is no point in saying that. Doesn't he know that the guild's authority is more important than any money? Then the man suddenly began to justify himself and apologize, but the leader did not want to listen to him and said that they would talk in the guild and ordered him to return. With annoyance, Yeon Seok turned around and went to the headquarters. The leader apologized to Kang Jin Hyuk, saying that as he promised he would pay, and also provide all the rights to the body of this monster. He also added that he hopes that they can continue to fight together. The boy knew he couldn't trust the Titan Guild, but he thought its leader could be trusted. Then he said he hoped for cooperation too. Yeon Seok, who was standing behind, thought that the leader should be thinking about the guild's benefit, but he took the side of this C-rank hunter. The man understood that San Ho was still needed by the Titan Guild, but if he continued to behave like this and interfere with the development of the guild, everything could end badly. When things calmed down, rumors began to circulate in the guild about the monster that had appeared in the sky. It was officially announced that it had been destroyed by the Titan Guild leader, So Sang-ho, but in reality, it was only a C-rank hunter. No one could believe it, but it was a fact that the guild leader personally invited him to join, but he refused. Another employee asked how confident this guy was in his abilities, since he was personally contacted by Seo Sang-ho himself. At this time, the Ultron Guild scout reported the situation and talked about the hospitalized A-rank hunter, An Do-yoon, who had very good abilities. The man was asked how this happened then, but he said that he was stitching the soil, and it seemed to be the work of that C-rank hunter. The rumors turned out to be true, so we need to find out more. 2 men were discussing this case and said that this strange hunter was a hidden class. Another man asked if he was being too hasty, since the hidden class is not that common. But the man replied that it was because of the 3 hidden class members that their guild had risen so high. He couldn't let another guild get this hunter. So, either they'll take him first or destroy him completely. It's a good thing Jin Hyuk was sleeping at home at the time. Soon he woke up and tried to understand where he was and what was happening. He suddenly got out of bed, screamed, and thought about how long he had slept. He couldn't even imagine that he would lie there for 2 days like a dead man, and it seemed to be his body's reaction to overload. Moreover, the guy was very hungry. When Jin Hyuk ordered food and left the room, he was surprised to see Lucia in the kitchen. She looked at him in fear, munching on a chocolate chip cookie, and then asked in surprise if the guy had already woken up. The angry guy, seeing a lot of chocolate wrappers and cookies on the floor, shouted, "Ask what the girl turned his house into." Taking the bag filled with candy wrappers, Jin Hyuk said that he collected it all to give to Lucia for her help, and she ate it all in 2 days. But the girl replied that she couldn't do anything, because it was all so delicious. Moreover, it was the only thing she found edible in this house. The guy replied that then she would go back where she came from. Why did she wait here until he woke up? Lucia said that she was looking after the guy while he was sleeping, especially since she couldn't leave right away, because she also didn't want to be in a place with such dirty air. Jin Hyuk asked why she couldn't leave, and Lucia replied that he didn't open the entrance to the dungeon for her, so she couldn't go back there. It sounded like nonsense, since the entrance was always open. Jin Hyuk immediately ran to the room that had the portal. Arriving in the room, he pointed to the entrance to the dungeon to the surprised girl and said that he was in the same condition. Shocked, Lucia said that when she came here, there was nothing here. Then an idea came to her mind and she told the guy to open the door to the room. Jin Hyuk obeyed and pressed the handle. Lucia looked through the open door and the guy followed her. The gate was not there and Lucia said she was right. Jin Hyuk asked what was going on. Only then did Lucia realize that the guy didn't know about it either, and he said that when he was there, the entrance to the dungeon always opened. Lucia said that then, it was quite possible that that crazy magician placed Jin Hyuk in the dimensional travel indicator. The guy asked to explain it more simply, then Lucia replied that the final goal of this dungeon is Jin Hyuk, so it opens where Jin Hyuk is located. Then the guy asked what would happen if something went wrong. Would the dungeon really fall on his head? The girl replied that Jin Hyuk was smart, and it was good that this magic failed. The guy replied that it was the greatest luck in his life. Clutching his growling stomach, Jin Hyuk asked why the delivery hadn't arrived yet. Finally, the courier knocked on the door and, apologizing, said that something strange had happened, as if he had driven around in circles but could not find the client's apartment. The guy took the bag of food and told Lucia that it was time to eat, and the girl asked if the food was sweet. Jin Hyuk replied that it was not sweet, but very tasty. While the boy was unpacking the delivery, Lucia asked how the courier could find this place, since the boy's house had detection reduction magic cast on it. Jin Hyuk didn't know about it, and Lucia explained that it was a simple but effective magic. No one can find the guy's house, even if that someone knows the address. Jin Hyuk asked why Lucia put this on his apartment, and the girl answered that while he was sleeping, some strange people came here. She said that it could have been the Guardians, or Ultron. Some people from the guild came and said something incomprehensible, and they were so annoying that Lucia decided to cast magic so that they would not interfere anymore. The guy wondered in surprise, why did such large guilds need him? What happened while he was sleeping? It was necessary to read the latest news on the internet while Lucia greedily gobbled up her food. Kang Jin Hyuk saw a headline about himself with an attached video of him attacking a huge monster as a C-rank hunter. He thought with disappointment that the guild had promised not to disclose this, but they couldn't even keep it a secret. With her mouth full, the girl suddenly asked why Jin Hyuk wasn't eating, and what was he doing that was so interesting. He was just looking at his rectangle and looking for new problems. Scratching his head, the guy asked if it could be considered a problem that he had become too popular. Lucia exhaled and said that Jin Hyuk was crazy. While they were trying to find the guy's apartment, Jin Hyuk himself understood that he wanted too much. He passed off Lucia's merits as his own, which was advantageous for him, but with this came fame, which he was unable to cope with. There is too much unfairness towards newcomers and guilds. As soon as even the most insignificant competitor appears, a race with him begins. So the guy, having acquired the body of a monster, also acquired an extra headache, but there is no point in regretting what happened. Then Jin Hyuk told Lucia that if she ate, they would go to the dungeon. Now the guy must make sure that he doesn't meet with any hunters or guilds and become even stronger. In the dungeon, he will level up by killing more monsters and getting more powerful items. At this time, a strange figure stood on the roof of Jin Hyuk's house. She was very attentive to what was happening around her and looked dangerous. And the boys, having gone into the dungeon, discussed the huge Leviathan in the gnome's house. He asked why Jin Hyuk brought only his head and where is the rest. The guy replied that there was a body, but it was no longer good for anything. Lucia added that the monster was too weak and could not withstand her strength. The gnome said contemptuously that such long-eared guys do not value raw materials, so they are of no use. Lucia seemed to explode, calling the gnome a grandpa digger, and he in turn shouted that there would not even be a smell of an elf in his house anymore. But the girl said to give her the promised arrows, then she would leave herself. But their quarrel was interrupted by Jin Hyuk, who asked if it was possible to make a weapon from the top of the Leviathan. The surprised dwarf asked why he brought this head then, if he knew nothing. But then, exhaling and calming down, he told Jin Hyuk and Lucia to wait a little. The dwarf approached the trophy that Jin Hyuk had brought him and touched it with his hand, from which small discharges seemed to flow. The boys didn't understand what the gnome was doing, but he, in turn, said that what was inside the monster was still alive. Then he punched a hole through part of the Leviathan with one blow. And then he took out a turquoise ball from there, saying that it was the best part of the Leviathan's body. With this thing, the monster could shoot lightning. The guy looked at the ball producing lightning in surprise. He realized that if he cast magic on his orichalcum club, he would be able to shoot lightning himself. Jin Hyuk asked the dwarf what he wanted as payment. He replied that he didn't need payment, but if the guy wanted to help him, then let him drive that long-eared girl away from here since she can't be here. Before Lucia exploded, the guy told her to take these words with understanding, since the dwarf was on edge before such an important matter. But the girl was already angry and began to call the old gnome names and threaten him with a hole in the head. But Jin Hyuk told her to be patient, because this gnome, although rude, was kind at heart, and then promised the girl any sweetness for her patience. A little later, when the guys returned, the city became cloudy again. Jin Hyuk, carrying bags of sweets, thought that the girl might have been cursed so that she couldn't eat sweets, since an ordinary person would have developed diabetes a long time ago. It then occurred to Jin Hyuk that he could just buy the sugar right away. But at that moment, he suddenly felt something very strange. After mastering the aura technique, his senses became heightened, so he sensed something was wrong. It was as if someone was following the guy, but it was hard to notice him, as if he was invisible.